Adobe has pretty much become the standard in our industry for creative software. Now we can argue whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's not what this video is about. There's one software that I always get asked about in the Adobe suite, and that is After Effects. I know it can be a daunting challenge just to open it on some machines, but in this video I want to take a quick look at the basics of the platform, how we can use it as instructional designers and e-learning creators, and how, let's be honest, I cheat to create amazing looking content with very minimal effort. So you join me down on the desktop. The first thing we're going to do is load After Effects. We always get a nice little graphic at the start when we load After Effects. Now, let's start with some basics around what After Effects is and isn't. After Effects is not a video editing platform. After Effects is a motion graphics and VFX, or visual effects, platform. That's a really important distinction, because what you don't want to be doing is loading loads of video clips into After Effects to try and create your actual edit, your video cut. What After Effects is for is creating either animated content or compositions that sit within your wider video edit. For now, let's just look at the basics of After Effects itself, and then we'll look at how we can cheat to create cool looking stuff with minimal effort, and finally we'll look at how it works with an actual video editing software. We'll talk about Premiere Pro in this instance, but you could apply it to other things. So when we load up After Effects, the first thing we need to do is start a new project. This is a really simple part. You're used to seeing this if you're using Adobe software for anything else. We click New Project. Perhaps unlike some of the others, it doesn't immediately ask us for where should we put it and what should we call it. So when we go in, the first thing to do is to always go in, Save As. Here we have the default view in After Effects. Over here we have our project panel. This is where all the footage and effects and shapes that we use are going to appear. Down at the bottom here we have our timeline. The objects on the timeline will appear here, as well as some controls. The actual timeline will appear here. This is very standard for video and even some e-learning tools. Over on the far right, we have some basic effects. We have our preview setting options, our audio options, basic information about whatever we've selected, as well as things like text and paragraph, tracking settings, and content aware fill. We're not going to talk about some of these today, but some we will look at. And right here in the middle we have our preview pane. At the minute we have nothing to preview, and so we have our two main options, new composition and new composition from footage. The basic idea here is that everything in After Effects is based on compositions. These are a bit like separate timelines from the video editing world, but not completely the same. What you can do is create several compositions and then nest them within other compositions. Layer them up. Because they're not video, they're motion graphics, it's a bit like working with vectors in that you're not automatically having a kind of full coverage background on things, you're not stuck working with one thing at a time that automatically covers something else up. Let me show you what that looks like. We'll start with a new composition. The only difference between selecting new composition versus new composition from footage is that when going from footage, you give it a piece of video and it automatically makes that part of the composition and the length of the composition. I don't have a piece of footage to work from, so let's just click new. It allows me to name, I'll just leave it as comp1 for the moment. It allows me to choose the resolution and frame rate. Generally speaking, in our industry especially, 24 frames a second is fine and 1080p is fine. Most users who take in our content are not using high resolution 4K screens, they're on workplace monitors. Now there are some more specific settings down here around aspect ratio, frame rates outside of the presets. We'll leave that all as it is for now. It's not important when we first start out to know all of these things. it asks us what our preview resolution would be. Now, I would always recommend setting this to quarter. It's the lowest preset, and it gives you the best chance of being able to preview your work without kind of stuttering your way through it. After Effects is a very RAM intensive program. Most After Effects kind of suitable machines, I would suggest, will have at least 32 gigabytes of RAM. Now, you can run it on less, you can run it on 16 gigabytes of RAM, but you will have a slightly rough time of it. So I would really suggest 32 and above. Here we can set the timecode and duration. So we want the timecode to start at 0 because this is the start of our first composition. And we want to, at the minute, have a 2 minute and 48 seconds composition. That's quite long for the example that we're doing. So let's in fact just do a 15-second composition. Now, it asks us to set a background color. This background color is not going to come out with the video necessarily. This is just a working color for us to work on top of. So I'll leave it as white. You can choose whatever works for you. Now, there are some other options here where we can go to advanced and 3D renderer. But the simple fact is that when you're starting out, you can just leave everything in these areas as standard. You don't need to go into this level of detail just when you're getting started in After Effects. Now that we've got our basic settings here, we can click OK and it will create our first composition. With our first composition open, we're now ready to start adding things. Now, I'm not going to create a beautiful, wonderful composition here. I'm just going to show you how the basic controls work. Ultimately, in After Effects, all you are doing is moving shapes and text and images and videos around to form some kind of sequence. That's it. That's all After Effects can do for you. Now, some of that we'll do manually with keyframes, and some of that we can do with effects and plugins. To start with, I'll show you the kind of manual controls that we have. Let's start by adding a simple shape to the screen. We come up here, let's just add a rectangle. Once I've clicked that, you can see I have some controls up here around the fill and stroke color and the width of the stroke. Let's just draw that shape here, this black square, and then come back up and click the selection tool. You can also just hit V. Those shortcuts really come in handy once you start working with multiple things on the screen at once. You can see with our square on the screen, it now appears on our timeline as this bar. If I don't want it to be on the timeline for the whole time, I can adjust it so that it's only there from this point or across the whole thing. Over here on the left, we see all the items currently in this composition. Now, there are two main sections for everything that will appear here, the contents and the transform option. The contents are the specifics for the item itself. In this case, it's a shape we have drawn in After Effects, and therefore we have a lot of control over it. By going into the rectangle, I can see that there's a path control, there's a stroke control, there's a fill control. Now these allow me to change how they blend to a scene, but by expanding them I can also do things like change the color, change the stroke width, change line caps, change dashes rather than a fixed line. These controls give me a tremendous amount of control, and what's more, many of them are not fixed controls. Wherever you see this little stopwatch, that means that you can trigger changes in this through keyframes. Keyframes are effectively set points along the timeline that tell After Effects something is changing. Now, one of my favourite things about After Effects is the fact that keyframes don't just happen suddenly. It automatically does something called tweening. Now, what that means is that if I tell it that at this point, the colour, let me just hit that to add a keyframe, is white, but that at this point, the colour is red, it won't just go, okay, so at this moment, it goes from white to red. What will happen, and if I make the stroke a little bigger so that everyone can see it, is that as we move between them, it will become a gradual change. it's effectively created frames within that space between the two keyframes, thus tweening. With those keyframes removed, let's take a look at what sits inside the transform section. This is the area that really allows you to get things moving, literally. Here we can keyframe the position, the scale, the rotation, and the opacity of this shape. So for instance, we could have it start here, and we could keyframe the position and the rotation. And then what we could say is that when you get to this point, I want it to be here, and I would like the rotation to look something like that. So what's going to happen now is it's going to do that tweening job again, and as I press that, the shape moves. Really quick, really easy movement on the screen. What I can then do is slightly adjust these keyframes so that they happen at somewhat different times. The rotation now stops a little bit earlier and it starts to come back down. You could continue to keyframe this endlessly across your timeline. Now, another thing that you can do just from this left-hand section here is add some key little items here, one being motion blur. So if I have this item selected and enable motion blur, that tweening then adds a little bit of just that feeling of movement that blur naturally brings. This is especially useful when it comes to things like text moving. If text moves in a straight line and is perfectly legible the whole way along, in some ways that's great, but in other ways it just doesn't look quite right. Let's add a little bit of text here, just using our text tool at the top. Make that black using this setting over here, and then let's add some keyframes. In fact, let's start it over here off screen. And then let's go to transform, activate keyframing for positioning, and say that at this point it's going to come to here. And we would like motion blur still turned on. Excellent. So now when we play that, you can see we just have that ever so slight bit of blurring as it moves that then goes away when it stops. Now obviously this is a ridiculously simple composition with very little point behind it, but you can immediately see how just these simple content and transformation keyframes allow you to pretty much do anything. All we're doing is moving different elements around on a screen. Here we've got drawn elements, but there's no reason you couldn't create existing PNGs or JPEGs or use footage or GIFs, load them into here and add this additional movement. Now, what about those kind of plugins and effects I was talking about earlier? This is where I think After Effects really gets interesting. Let's delete these keyframes so that this text is just normal text, and I'll delete that shape altogether. Let's say we want that text just there, and I want it to kind of come in a kind of flowing pattern. Now I could, in theory, create a different text item for every single letter and then keyframe their movement in and out of the scene. However, that sounds incredibly labour intensive. It's not the kind of project I would want to take on if I had to turn this around in a sensible amount of time. But what I can do is download a simple plugin or an effect. All I need to do is head over to here on the right hand side, Effects and Presets. I can go into my animation presets and I've got a whole host of options. Now I'm a big fan of the Creative Dojo options. These are available for free online and I'll include a link in the description. And this one called Typeflow is one of my favourite ways of bringing in text. I can simply click on it, drag it over and apply it. And you can see now it's working out where the letters are, what size they are, where their movement needs to be. So when I now hit play, got a very simple in and out animation. Really nice. Now with just a little bit of text there, obviously it just looks the same as if you had done this in PowerPoint. However, one of the big strengths here is the level of control. I can decide exactly how this is going to look. I can change pretty much every variable in how this stuff is moving. So I've just obviously fiddled around with some settings there. You can see by this green line, it is re-caching so that it can play back. When you've got a solid green line, you should get a fairly consistent playback. There we are, something a little bit different. What I also have are effect controls. If we head up over here, where we had our project setting, we now also have effect controls under this red square. Here you can see all the effects that are currently being applied here, and all the variables that you can change: duration, delay, dampening, buoying, enabling the intro versus the outro. You might just want one or the other. You can also change things such as position, scale, and rotation and opacity, and per character animation. Here you can literally go in and decide how much animation and how the animation works for every single letter. This level of control is really useful. Now, you're not going to use it often, and in fact 90% of the time, especially when working with text, I just grab the type flow preset and add it on. It's a nice, quick, easy way to make the text look a little bit more interesting on screen. The same is true of objects. Let's say I put another square over here, but that's just a little bit boring. Just sat there this whole time. Well, maybe there's some voiceover going on. Maybe it's an icon. Well, okay, let's bring it to life a little bit. Let's go to our animation preset and go to behaviours. I really like wiggle. Specifically, wiggle position. By applying the wiggle position preset, just by dragging and dropping it onto there, you can see it's moved slightly. Now, what's actually going on here is this recaches is After Effects is going to slightly move that object around. So there we go. Seemingly random little bit of movement. These kinds of behaviours and presets, these animations, would take a very long time to keyframe. And if you come down here to the effects line, you can see just how much is actually going on. But also how much control you have over it. How much wiggle do you want? How far from the original point should it go? One of the best things you can do when learning After Effects is put some text and some shapes on the screen and start dragging and dropping behaviours, presets, effects and transitions just to see what they do. Play around with the settings over here, make these bigger and have a little look at exactly what happens when I set position way out of whack. Oh, okay, so then that's going that way rather than this way so much, and that's actually now a little bit jerky because of the amount of space it's trying to cover in such little time. So maybe if I was going to do that, I would need to reduce the amount of pixels or increase the speed so that now we've got a very different looking feel. It's almost like it's vibrating, desperate to jump out of the screen at you. That's the same animation preset, just with a couple of little tweaks made in the effects settings. This is one of the major upsides of utilizing After Effects: control. Now, the flip side of control is responsibility. It's vital when you go into After Effects, you have a vision, you know what you want to achieve. And this is where really effective storyboarding and planning comes into effect. Let's delete this and move on to what I said we would cover right at the start. Cheating. How do we cheat when using After Effects? Well, there are a couple of ways we can do this. The two that I tend to utilize the most are Lottie files and pre-made After Effects templates. Let's start with Lottie files. If you haven't heard of Lottie files before, Lottie files are SVG animations which are really quick and easy to host on websites and in authoring tools. Some authoring tools now even have specific integrations with them. But when it comes to After Effects, they're super useful for pulling in small, simple pieces of animation that can elevate your work. So, let's head over to the Lottie Files website and take a look. So when we get here to lottiefiles.com, we can log in. There are paid and free accounts available. But let's say we just want a very simple thumbs up animation. we'll search, and here we'll see all the thumbs up examples available out there on Lottie. As you can see, these are really simple. Nothing maybe to write home about, but having just looked at keyframing and presets, can you imagine doing this with all these little pieces coming off the thumb? All the work that would take. Well, let's not do any of that. Let's go into this example here and let's copy this Lottie animation URL. Thank you very much. Now let's go back to After Effects. Now, I mentioned before that plugins are a fantastic part of using After Effects, and that's exactly what I'm going to use now. I'm going to come up to Window and go to Extensions and open a plugin called Body Moving. Now, the link to the Body Moving plugin is available in the description of this video, and the good news is it's completely free of charge. Now, you can see there are a couple of different things that it can do, but what I'm looking for is Import Lottie Animation. I can click there and simply paste that URL. Then all I need to do is hit Import from URL. And what's happening now is that After Effects is actually recreating everything we just saw on the Lottie Files website right here in After Effects. Now, because it's working from SVGs, it's not just pulling down a video, it's creating a vector-based animation. That means you can edit everything about it. Here you can see the import's finished, so when I go back over to the project screen, we'll see that in this new little composition 1 point, we now have, if we open that composition up, the video we just saw on Lottie Files, except it's right here in our version of After Effects. As I mentioned before, it's not just a solid video, instead it has pulled down literally all of the shapes, all of the pieces of animation, all of the movement, and what we're seeing here is that we have a composition within a composition. So clearly we have these shapes going on that you can see, and then we have this main composition with the thumb in it. Now if we opened the, what they've called it here, pounce, we would see all the shapes that are involved in the hand. And what this means is we could open up absolutely everything, just as we did before, go into contents, go into group. We can change path colors, we can change fill colors, we can change anything we want. If we get to here and then go, oh, actually, you know, this, these pieces of confetti, which ones, these ones here, I think I'd quite like to change something about them. I'd like them to be bigger, or perhaps I'd like that one to be a different color. We could open it up. This one appears to be in French, so it's slightly more difficult to find, but here we go. Here's the color. We could click into there and we could change it from this peachy color to a kind of a bright red. There we go. We can see which one we're changing there. So that one is now bright red rather than that peachy color that it was before. Again, minute level of control, but now we've created this really, really nice little animation in what, maybe a minute? As I mentioned before, one of the best things about After Effects is our ability to layer things up, to put compositions within compositions. Now you can actually see this within this Lottie file, but on top of that, we can go further. We can create a new composition and drop some footage down into the background. Here's a lady at a bank. But what we can then do is take another composition, let's say this one, and put it on top, so that now we have a thumbs up going on top of all of that. Now, is that particularly well thought out or well spaced animation? No, but it gives you an idea of what you can do here. I've taken a background piece of footage, added a simple bit of Lottie file. I can quickly move that, place it over here maybe. Let's drop that there. Then we could add in a little bit of text. Perhaps we're in fact going to change the whole thing here, because this feels a little bit odd, doesn't it, with just that thumbs up being the only thing that we do. Let's move that around. So that's where our composition is going to end. Let's change the working zone down there. So this eventually will be a kind of 8-frame composition there. We'll call that good. And then let's add some text. Let's add some text over here and say, let's assume this is, I don't know, some kind of completion screen after a quiz. That doesn't look too marvelous, so let's make it a little bit bigger. Let's move that onto 2 lines. Lovely. Not particularly easy to read though, so let's take a look at how we could change that. Maybe let's add a square behind the whole thing. Move that down a couple of layers. Oh, pardon me. Move that down a couple of layers. And then let's just change the opacity of that down to, I don't know, let's go with 60. We could then come back up to our text and let's say make the text white. Let's use that text flow animation that we looked at earlier. And now when we hit the play button, we get that nice little animation. Really quick, really simple. Probably not ready to be used yet, but some refinement now is an awful lot easier. We've added a nice little text introduction, a video background, an overlay, and a big old thumbs up to say well done. Super quick, super easy, and of course what you could do is stop the frame there and have that be the background where maybe a button to continue comes up somewhere. Really quick and easy by utilising Lottie files. Next up, let's look at templates for After Effects. Now, one of my favourite places for templates for After Effects is Envato Elements. I've spoken about this site before, but it really is great. So let's just go over to Video Templates and After Effects. Here it'll show us, what have you got? We've got broadcast packages, elements, infographics, logo strings, openers, product promos, titles, and video displays. Let's see what we've got going on in infographics. Here we can see a HUD dashboard or graphs animating in. This is the kind of thing that can be a real pain to create from scratch, but actually super easy if you've got a template you can utilise. It's the kind of graphic we've all wanted to create. A little further down here we can see arrows that draw themselves in. Those are really useful, especially this kind of hand-drawn effect, as it even gives you a guide on how to utilise it within the pack. Let's have a look at these hand-drawn arrows. Downloading them is super easy. Just hit download, tell Envato what you're using them for, and that's it, we've downloaded them. We can now head over to the downloads file, extract, and open up the After Effects file. We don't need to save the thing we just created a moment ago. Often you'll find different versions of After Effects have been used. When it detects that, it will just go, oh hey, we need to create a new version, and it's done. So here you can see a large number of compositions. Now this is because every arrow is going to be its own composition. And here you can see how this one, arrow 39, works. We have one controller, contents, which is the lines and shapes, the effects, and the ability to transform, exactly the same as we saw before. As we track along, we can see this is what this arrow looks like, and then it fades away at the end. So just like with Lottie files, you could now drag these compositions into anything else you create. You could use this arrow or this arrow here, which seems to be a little bit of a kind of come in from nowhere and then go a long arrow and then fade away again. You could drop these into anything you create. You could add these into an otherwise just normal video file with an image that appears, just to add a little bit of visual interest. No work required from you other than grabbing a file, let's say arrow 35, dragging it down onto your thing here, positioning it, and then we've added this to that composition. Now we have two things going on. This is how easy it can be to add a little bit of visual interest using After Effects. But we can go further. If we go back to Envato, and perhaps rather than looking at infographics, look at openers. This is where you can get really cool small pieces of incredibly complex animation that you don't have to do any work for. Let's take a look at this short Christmas greeting. Let's download it and go through exactly the same process again. We'll download the zip file, we'll extract the files, and we'll open it in After Effects. Now in this example, you can see there's also a tutorial video. This is quite common with more complex sequences, where you'll get a video or a simple PDF that just guides you through how it's been built and how you can edit it. So now that we're back here in After Effects, you can see it's loaded in and is starting to cache, as shown by the little green line, this piece of animation. You can also see from all these things going on, just how complicated this actually is. Creating this from scratch could potentially take weeks of work, not just in terms of creating the graphics, but the keyframing, the effects you would need to create. But instead, we downloaded it in what, a minute and a half maybe? Yes, there's a little bit of caching going on now, but that's just waiting for it to load really, isn't it? So, now that that's fully cached, when we hit the play button, we can see this really quite impressive little bit of animation and an opportunity to add some text. What this allows us to do is create a really nice looking intro without actually doing any of the hard work ourselves. So, let's start by editing. First thing we need to do is go into the logo and text section. Here we can edit the text. So let's change that text to instructional design tips. If I could use a keyboard, that would be marvelous, but there we go, that at least gives us a rough idea. Next up, let's go up to the logo and text, and let's consider how we might want to change this. So here, this is actually, as you can see, an Illustrator file. An SVG or vector graphic, so we could change this for just about anything. In my case, I'm just going to add the IDT logo and call that good. I'll then go back to the render me composition, and you can see it is actively recaching as we speak. So with that cached, we can now play, and instead of text here, we'll see instructional design tips, and instead of the Envato logo, we'll see the instructional design tips logo. Now remember, all I did there was add a flat PNG, but it's taken that and created this rather lovely 3D turning effect. Now, obviously this is quite a specific introduction. You're not going to use this for a video you launch in June. But this little 3D turning effect, that's quite nice. The good news is, that's its own composition right here. So I could take that. I could utilise that somewhere else. I could pull this apart for just this little sequence in the middle here. But if not, in the meantime, I've got a really lovely little Christmas introduction that looks like I've spent a lot of time and a lot of effort to make it look this good. As you've seen, in fact, I've spent maybe a total of 3 minutes creating this, because someone else has done all the hard work for me. And that really is the key, in my mind, to utilising After Effects as an instructional designer. You do not need to become a master, you do not need to become an animator or an illustrator. There are so many resources, free and paid, out there that you can utilise. I love Envato, as I've mentioned, because it's really affordable and the licensing terms are phenomenal. Things that I utilise from there get a license to be utilised across pretty much anywhere. Same with the music and the fonts and the images from the platform. Other platforms do exactly the same, such as Shutterstock and Motion Array. In fact, Motion Array is kind of my backup, my other subscription service for this kind of thing. Those two platforms really are the two that I'd recommend, but loads of others do them. Some even give their stuff away for free, or give like a selection of things each month away for free. The important thing is to not feel like you have to work from scratch. And in fact, now that you have a file like this, it can be a great opportunity to start digging through, to open up all these areas and go, so how did someone make this? Oh, okay, so they've got a load of actual film files in here rather than motion graphics going on. But there are still some motion graphics. I can see we've got things like they've used an Illustrator file rather than a PNG for the logo to allow for better scaling. Your ability to pull things apart can be a great way to learn. So I mentioned right at the start, I'd talk a little bit about how we can utilize all of this. Well, for one thing, being able to do some real basic stuff in After Effects allows you to really elevate your videos. Now, whether that's introductions or lower thirds, or perhaps just the occasional little bit of animation. Perhaps it's just some of those little hand-drawn arrows that we saw from that template pack appearing on screen, or a little thumbs up well done animation screen rather than just a that's correct screen in Storyline. All those little things can help you elevate your work for very minimal effort. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is how this works with other Adobe software. If you're used to working in Premiere Pro and editing video, you may have noticed that if you right-click a clip, it'll give you the option to replace it with an After Effects composition. Now, this is one of my favourite things to do. I do it in most of my videos, and when you do this, it basically takes that little clip, creates a new composition in After Effects for you, and allows you to edit it there live in After Effects, whilst passing all that information back through to Premiere Pro. It allows Premiere to be great at what it's great at, editing video, getting your cut together, maybe some basic transitions, but it allows After Effects to really bring its best foot to your work. It allows you to do all your VFX and editing in the best possible platform for it and keep all those connections made so that when you're ready to render your video, okay, so I need to pull this from Premiere and that from After Effects. The same is true with audio. If you right click an audio file in Premiere, you can choose to edit that in Audition. It opens Audition, you edit your audio, you close Audition, it passes that information back through to Premiere Pro. This is called dynamic linking, but it's one of the most powerful arguments for using Adobe in our world. The interconnectivity of these products is phenomenal. So hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully you're now a little bit less worried about picking up After Effects for the first time. This is by no means a masterclass. This is not everything. This is the tiniest little slither of what After Effects is capable of and what you can do with it. But it's something to get you started. Now, I haven't spoken in this video about how to render a video because it's kind of common sense. You hit render, you tell it where to go, and you tell it to go. That's it. That's all there is to it. But if there are things you run into or that you struggle with or that you'd like to know more specifically, let me know down in the comments.